When I was about 19, I attended art school in a major city in the US. I won't name the city or school I was in, but it was one of those schools tucked away in an area that wasn't too great. What I mean by that is due to the increase of high crime in my city, and it's not the type of area to be in at night. Luckily, campus was a little ways away, but that didn't necessarily mean it was safe. My first week of classes there went pretty well for the most part, and I even met some people in one of my art classes. They seemed cool, but didn't really consider them as friends yet. One night, I was sitting alone at the dining hall, eating my dinner while texting my boyfriend when some guy approached me and sits down across from me. All he had on him was a food tray and an empty cup. I said hi, and he reluctantly nods his head and continues to look at me. I ask him some questions like what his name was, and the only thing I get is a dry response. I uncomfortably try and continue to talk to him, but he didn't contribute to what was barely a conversation. At that point, I told him I had to go back to my dorm and that it was nice to meet him. As I'm walking away, leaving the dining hall, I take one glance over in his direction and see him practically staring through me. That night, I was on FaceTime with my boyfriend and I expressed as to how creeped out I was. It didn't have anything to do with him specifically, but there was just something about his stare that really unnerved me. I didn't think anything of it at the time and just thought of him as weird. The next day at the dining hall, I wore a hoodie to hide my face from him, hoping that he wouldn't recognize me. However, to my surprise, he wasn't there, which was strange because I see him here nearly every day. Long story short, I eat my food and go back to my dorm with only a few minutes to spare. Campus security was pretty strict about students walking around late at night, so we had to be in our dorms at a certain time. I go into my room, hop into bed, and turn on the TV to hopefully help me go to sleep. Fast forward till around an hour into the movie I was watching. I started to drift off to sleep when I felt my bed shift. Normally, one wouldn't think anything of it, but with me having a childhood fear that still stuck with me, I looked under the bed. The very second I did, I see the very same kid I saw at the dining hall. I sprinted out of my room and out into the hallway, running to the front desk. When campus security arrived, I led them to my room where they found him trying to escape from the window. Turns out, this guy used to be a student here, but got kicked out due to doing the same exact thing to another student. I have no idea as to how he knew what dorm I was in, and I just assumed that he had followed me by keeping a distance. He was thankfully arrested, but I never found out what exactly happened to him after that. I had just graduated from that school a little over a year ago, and I hope I never see him again.
This happened to me during my first year of university, in October. I was living in the dorms, and I need to give you a brief rundown of the dorms. You need a key card to gain access to your specific floor, so even though someone on the 3rd floor and 4th floor live in the same building, they can't access each other's floors. I had injured myself playing sports, so I was under orders to rest, which meant no Halloween parties for me. Pretty sad for a horror fiend like myself, but to try and make the time a happy one, I busied myself helping to make costumes for people and doing their makeup. Once I finally finished, I packed up my makeup and decided to watch some movies in my room. A guy popped up and introduced himself. We chatted a bit and exchanged email addresses, and I walked back to my room and said goodnight. The first warning sign was that he walked into my room behind me, despite me saying that I was going to walk into my room. I felt really awkward and tried to say in a roundabout way that he needed to leave, but he wasn't getting the hint. I finally had to say, "You need to leave my room now." I chalked this up to him maybe being drunk or something, but I did wonder how he got onto my floor if he wasn't with anyone partying. Before I went to bed that night, I checked my email, and there were 5 from the creep. The first being, "Hey, I'm so glad we're friends," and the rest asking why I wasn't online. A few days later, I got a knock on my door when I was studying, and it was him. I explained that I was studying and needed privacy. He tried to walk into my room again, but I braced my arm on the frame and said firmly that I needed to study. The next day, he was at my door again, and the next. I began pretending that I wasn't home. Another day there was a knock at the door, and when I checked the peephole, there was no one there, and I assumed the postman had come. He started hiding from the peephole so I'd be more likely to answer the door. I told my roommate never to open the door if he was there, and I told the people living on my floor that this guy was beginning to creep me out, so if he wanted to get on the floor, whatever sob story he gave them, don't let him on. A few days after that, I was on the bus coming home, and I got a text from someone who lived on my floor telling me not to come home because the creep was on my floor and was sitting in front of my door, just waiting. I went to a friend's house and spent the night, and when I got home, I was told he waited for 4 hours before leaving. At this point, I was getting freaked out. A few days after that, he began waiting outside the building, and if I left, he'd follow me wherever I went. I was too spineless to tell him to go away, and I tried to be more passive about it. I never spoke and never gave any indication I was paying attention, but he followed me to class, the cafeteria, and always tried to follow me home and get access to the floor. I went to the resident advisor and told her what had happened. She spoke to the RA for his floor and was told that the creep had been telling his own RA that we were best friends and dating. My RA tried to explain that I was uncomfortable, but the other RA believed him, and that was that. Thankfully, one thing did deter him. He'd never approached me if I was with a group of people, so my floor mates banded together. If I went to dinner, I went with my floor mates, and if I wanted a drink or seconds, someone had to come with me. Walking to class and even waiting for the bus was done in a group. He got onto my floor once when someone else was coming home and forced his foot in the door to let himself in. I was hidden in another room, and when he left my door to go and sit in the television lounge and wait for me, I went downstairs and ran around to the other side of the building and got into my room before he noticed. Then the phone calls began. I never gave him my phone number, but he somehow obtained my cell and room phone, and at first it'd be 1 to 2 phone calls a day until I told him that I wanted him to leave me alone. Then the calls began coming in every hour, with him begging and pleading for me to talk to him. Without caller ID, I needed to answer the phone because of school and my part-time job. At this point it was November and I was a wreck. I was tired of having to plan out doing simple things like going for food or walking to a bus stop. Stress wasn't helping me recover from my injury, and I was losing weight and I just looked sickly. I went back to the RA and begged her to help me. She went to the head of the dorms and explained everything that happened. I explained how far this had gone, and my roommate told them that he had followed her a few times, demanding that she tell him where I was. I felt awful. She never told me this because she was afraid of upsetting me further, and I felt like I was a jerk for putting her through this garbage. I don't know what went on behind closed doors. From what I guess, he was told to leave me alone, and any further contact would result in him being kicked out of the dorms. There was one email where he went insane on me, telling me how awful I was. How could I do this to him? We were so happy together. Surely I was cheating on him with other men. And after that, nothing. At first, when I'd see him around campus, I'd run to the women's toilets and hide. I'd see him around town or on campus and he'd always just stare at me. He never tried to approach me, never tried to get my attention, just staring.
This story is told in the perspective of a female. I never told this story in full detail to anyone other than my family and close friends, but I feel now is a good time to get it off my chest. When I was 24, I had just moved out of state to go to college in Washington with my boyfriend. We lived on campus, but because of the school's policy, he had to bunk with another guy as opposite genders weren't allowed. The news media was ultra-conservative and was very sensitive as to what people said or posted online. Since I didn't have any friends or know anyone, I decided to meet some new people online just for fun to talk to. Nothing serious relationship-wise. I did some quick searching online, signed up for a few apps to meet new people, and eventually met with a really nice guy on OkCupid. His name was Matt, and we hit it off well. He had a great taste for music and shared lots of songs with me and seemed to be interested in the same topics as me. Now, keep in mind that I was no way looking for a relationship with this guy. I have a lot of online friends who I never even met before, and yes, my boyfriend knew about Matt. Matt understood and respected that I had a boyfriend and that we just talk as friends. I genuinely enjoyed talking to Matt. We would play video games together and he'd even help me with my schoolwork sometimes. Our friendship went on for about a good month or so, but then it got weird. He one day asked me if I had sex and if I liked it. I told him that I didn't feel comfortable answering that and that it was inappropriate since we were just friends. He'd immediately respond, feeling guilty, talking about how he was sorry and that he didn't want to make me feel uncomfortable, and then change the subject. But as time progressed, he'd always try to bring sex back into the conversations, no matter how many times I told him not to. Our conversations kept getting more and more personal before I one day just stopped answering his calls. About a week later, he texted me asking if I went to this school. Down below the message was a picture of a building which was in fact my school. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach as I saw this. I didn't respond to him and just blocked him on all of my socials and my phone. A few days later, our school was under a hurricane watch and I was checking my email for any updates. For some reason, I checked my spam inbox, which I never do, and that's when I saw an email from, you guessed it, Matt. I have no idea as to how he got it, and I didn't want to know. When I opened the email, there was just one photo, which was my dorm number. I showed this to my boyfriend, and him and I had to file a report to campus security. But seeing as this was before stalking laws were invented, there was nothing the police could really do. After that, I never heard from Matt again. I'd like to think that it was just some elaborate joke, but then again, I've always wondered about that.
A couple years back when I was in college, I was the victim of a long-term stalker. I'm male. I was 20 at the time. It started out fairly innocuous. On Valentine's Day, I started to receive secret admirer type text messages from an unknown number. I assumed it was a friend of mine playing a joke, as I was in a room with a handful of tech-savvy people at the time. I tried to gauge their reactions and asked if anyone was messing with me. They all denied it, and I believed them. It was further confirmed that it was none of them when I got a phone call from the number. A voice on the other end said, "Is this John?" I replied, "Yes, who's this?" hoping I could identify the voice. At that point, they hung up and resumed texting. Things started to get weird when the person began asking pretty personal questions, including repeatedly asking, "Are you doing something tonight?" To which I replied, "Yes, I was working." But they kept insisting we should meet up. On top of all of this, I was getting various images sent to me from a separate email. This confirmed it wasn't a real number, and I now had a username to connect to the person. I don't know if it was their intention, but I actually enjoy trying to figure out stuff like this and took it upon myself to expose this person without giving anything away about myself. So I kept it up. I texted them back for a while and dug more and more information about the person, compiling it into a profile and eliminating possibilities. Unfortunately, this just encouraged them, as they insisted I send pictures, take pics, add pics to the convo, etc. Then they sent a weird one. It was a white lacy dress hanging in their closet with the accompanying text, "My wedding dress for when I marry you." Then various heart and love emojis. They continued to pry about where I was going to be that evening, and I still refused to give details. Then they dropped where they were going to be, a party on campus that night. I couldn't go regardless. I was working. Then I got another bombshell. They asked if I lived in apartment 68, which I did. I recognized the style of apartment they were in based on a picture from earlier, so I decided I'd throw a curveball. "You live in this complex, right?" "What? How do you know?" "I recognized your door." All the crappy apartments had the same color door frame, which was visible in the edge of the picture they sent. The conversation kind of fizzled out there. I didn't go to that party and I didn't get any more texts. Fast forward to October, the following school year. I was a senior and was super busy. One evening I got a text from an unknown number. "Is this John?" So I played dumb, pretended like I wasn't freaking out, that after many months this person was contacting me again and I still hadn't figured out who it was. These questions were instantly more personal and really weirded me out. Don't ruin the fun. Not knowing who I am is part of the mystery. I won't tell you who I am. Not now. Too much to lose. I don't want you to know. Not because I'm being cruel. It's just better if you didn't know. Honestly, at this point, I'm pretty tired of this crap and trying to work, but I do want to see if I can pick out any more details, so I'm doing the bare minimum to keep this going. This is December, the end of the semester. They proceeded to call me multiple times. I declined every call, but they kept calling. In total, they called 14 times that night, and eventually I just turned my phone off. The following week, I was in the class I TA'd. Students were presenting their final work on the projector, and I had queued multiple tabs on the projection computer. There were 2 different students that had work on Google Drive. When the second student logged into their account, they didn't open a private window, so it logged out the first student. I saw this happen, but the first student wasn't in the room, so when she came back, I asked her to re-log in. We were both standing in the projection booth. She was at one end of the computer, and I was messing with the sound system on the other side, but I happened to turn and look at the projector screen when she was logging into Google. This hit me like a ton of bricks. The username she logged in with was the same username as the TextNow account that had been sending me photos. I quickly turned away and pretended to be busy with something until she finished opening her work. I thanked her and she left the booth without realizing her mistake. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was going crazy for the rest of the class. After almost a year, I finally knew who it was. She finally slipped up, and honestly I was much more scared now than I had ever been. This person had a history of being pretty creepy around my friends, and although she had never personally interacted with me outside of class, all my friends had had strange experiences with her. I scheduled a meeting with a counselor who seemed to really care and offered to look into it. A couple weeks later, she emailed me saying, "This student's going abroad next semester, so we're not going to do anything." I insisted that at least something temporary be put into place. They didn't do anything, but what did I expect? This school's pretty notorious for not caring. I didn't run into her again. She hasn't texted me, so for the time being, that's where my story ends.